Okay. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Byron Sidious. And today's Storyteller's Corner is going to be a storyteller's review of The Revenant and the Tomb by Mr. Herman P. Hunter. Going along with the impulse that I have at this time to try and do a little bit more reading of indie genre fiction and provide reviews of some of those works for my fellow storytellers in the small press and indie press realm. I recently picked up this work by Mr. Hunter, predicated largely because I follow him on Twitter, on X, and I've enjoyed seeing his gives and takes in various writerly conversations and bookish talk on there. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and grab this. It's his first work, and give it a read through, put together my notes and my thoughts on this particular title, just like I did with Razor Fist's book. And as with that, I have got my handy-dandy notebook with the notes that I took. But I'm going to take a slightly different tack because I actually finished reading this book, unlike Razor Fist's debut work. This is another debut novella by Mr. Hunter, and I say novella simply because of its length. It's not a very long novel. I would say it is definitely a novella length work. Do not let that discourage you, however. I will say that up front. Herman P. Hunter's debut novella, The Revenant and the Tomb, brings readers into a grim, gritty fantasy setting with the mysterious wanderer Halcedric as he seeks out a small town guide near a mountain.
Hi.
That was a little, sorry about the jump cut there. My son came a-knocking. Sorry, where was I? The wanderer Halcedric, as he seeks out a small town guide near a mountain range of ill-cursed repute. After dealing handily, but not without any challenge, with some local toughs, the wanderer and his travel companions, the Wodeman Tolvgir and the Alani Herodiani, they employ Dram the guide, who shows them the way to the paths up the range to a nearby tomb, which has been the source of much bedevilment to the region in recent years and times. Despite Dram's warnings of ill fate for all who went treasure hunting there, seeking his services as a guide, Halcedric, a kind of knight-errant for the faith of the All-Father, referred to by him as, quote, the one true God of the West, leads his companions on into the mountains in search of this tomb. They are not there to hunt treasure, though. They are there to discover if the tomb still serves to cage a great evil, or if that evil is free in the world once more. Without getting into too many spoilers, I'm going to move on into a sectional breakdown soon, but first, I want to go over just some of the notes I've decided to highlight for this review presentation. First of all, we have got in the very opening of this novella some hard, sharp descriptors for Halcedric, for Dram, and for the dingy dive bar tavern where they meet up. It establishes excellent atmosphere, and that is rapidly deployed, without too much fluff or wasting of words and space. Superbly done. The opening chapter itself establishes a grim, rough and tumble, kind of grittier tone for this tale, in keeping with a sort of sub-genre of fantasy referred to frequently as grimdark. Moving along, that very first fight scene that I alluded to In a wonderful display of narrative skill, Mr. Hunter deftly avoids a common failing in so much of fantasy in the modern era, especially when establishing a man of mystery or badass character. Hal Cedric is not perfect in this fight with five strong armed thugs. He is agile, yes, he is quite strong, supernaturally so, it would seem, sure, but he gets wounded. He gets hit twice when going unarmed against five men with blades. That feels deserved, even in fantasy. Moreover, he feels these wounds, something that a lot of newer fantasy writers tend to wave off as they introduce Chad McSwordlord, supreme uber fighter of Swolgard. Whether out of faux edginess or sheer pride, or self insert power fantasies and wish fulfillment, many leading lads and ladies in modern fantasy are given this sort of blanket protection early on of a deus ex machina. My only small quibble was when the first foe was felled and how Cedric held the man up by just the wrist without shifting his own posture at all. That struck me as somewhat unnatural, but as the narrative explains later on, there's very good reason for that. It ends up playing off very well down the road. The next highlighted note from my notes as I went through: Mr. Hunter's environmental scene and activity work is that just right balance, which I myself have routinely and regularly struggled with sometimes in my own writing. He displays a firm craftsmanship for utilizing that sort of descriptor and material into the work. From chapter 5 early on, there's solid introduction work to these Yurch creatures, sort of an orc Kunari hybrid from their descriptions, especially the horns. The next note I wanted to highlight. There was a small linguistic quibble that I had with the following sentence on page 67. Quote, of the three, only Hal Cedric seemed the most unaffected by the barrows. This phrasing strikes me as awkward because it contains an element of comparison in using the most, whilst also using exclusivity in only Hal Cedric, causing the sentence to kind of collapse in on itself. The easiest fix for this would be to eliminate the words the most, so that the attempted comparison is eliminated, and the sentence would read as a declaration. Another possible fix would be adding for at the start and part after, so that it would read for the most part unaffected, as it implies that he was affected, but not nearly so much as his two companions, thus preserving comparison while removing exclusion. But again, a minor quibble overall. I've got myself a sidebar marked in here. Character reveal by what isn't said in chapter 10. Hal Cedric has known the Alani woman a long time, and observes that she doesn't engage in activities wherein she might lose. Everything that she engages in, she wins, per his own inner monologue. Now, in the current state of sociopolitical infection into every facet of media in life, one might be forgiven for having a knee-jerk reaction call of, she's a Mary Sue, she's a Mary Sue. But I would reject that. I would rebut that by asking the reader to consider the phrasing on the page. It says clearly, quote, she won't engage if she might lose. This doesn't claim universal superiority in everything that she does. It conveys, if one examines and thinks calmly, that this character knows her limits. and will abstain from needless risk. That denotes awareness, assessment, and the wisdom of humility to know when she is not the best person on hand for a given task. Much of that is said without needing to be expounded upon. It's actually very clever character work in that way. So let's go ahead and get on into the actual breakdown of elements sectionally for this tale. Characters, 8 out of 10. Make no mistake about it, Mr. Hunter demonstrates a firm grasp of character work in establishment and portrayal in his primary protagonist, Hal Cedric. Even his close companions are clearly well built, though I do have to take a couple of points off for Tolvgir and Herodiani, only each of them showing a thin layer of construction right now beyond mere archetypes into full-fledged three-dimensional characters. The words dwarf and elf don't appear in this work, but it is as clear to me as a stretch of saran wrap that the Wodeman is predicated on several dwarf tropes in fantasy. His use of a blunt weapon, he's battle ready and kind of battle thirsty, his mastery of earthen elements and being familiar with being inside caves and tunnels and what have you, his use of gems, the braided hair and beard, very dwarfy, and the Alani of elf tropes. She's svelte, she's agile, she's a master marksman, she's one of the ageless or fair folk, often a term used for fae or elven peoples in mythology. She's graceful, she's multi-talented, she talks to the animals, these special horses, which reminded me a little bit more of the Ranihin from Stephen R. Donaldson's Thomas Covenant novels. But you get my point. Plot, 8 out of 10. What begins as an unclear goal for this adventure quickly becomes solid, and the framework for it serves as an excellent slice of an unknown broader whole, but it's one that could easily stand up on its own, without supplemental material beforehand, and without necessitating that you go into a next part to get an encapsulated story in and of itself. It could be read as a standalone, and that be that. Although I am personally looking forward to seeing more of Hal Cedric and company. World building, 9.5 out of 10. Hands down, Herman P. Hunter is among today's best naturally immersive world builders. He doesn't excessively handhold the reader into every facet of his narrative realm, and he doesn't use featherweight vagaries either, striking that balance that is so vital in layering in elements of the world so seamlessly that you can immediately forgive any obvious tropes, as I mentioned in the character section. Narrative, voice, or technique, 7 out of 10. Mr. Hunter's style and structure are mechanically solid, straightforward, and naturally flowing, though they are tried and true. But they're tried and true done well, which counts for a lot these days. And pacing, 7 out of 10. Honestly, pacing is this work's weakest point, but even here, the novella chugs along at a good, hearty clip, with only really Chapter 11 being a glaring bit of filler or fluff for my liking. A note that I had made about Chapter 11 was that this chapter, while effective for deepening tone and mood, spends its relatively short length over 7.5 pages, what likely could have been accomplished in 1 or 2 pages at most. This is a rare whiff in an otherwise fabulously paced story. When we go through the mechanics of adding up everything on a point-by-point basis, we come to a relative average of around, mathematically, an 8. But this being a debut work, I'm going to give it that extra half a point grace and mark this work, The Revenant and the Tomb by Herman P. Hunter, an 8.5 out of 10. Revenant and the Tomb by Herman P. Hunter is definitive proof that fantasy as a genre, even with a touch of obvious faith-based messaging throughout, is still alive and well in indie publishing. And to be clear, even where that religious undertone lapses a couple times into overtone, it remains behind the line of preachy. It doesn't quite get there, since it is expertly folded into the primary protagonist's character development arc. It makes sense for the story. That takes a certain skill, and skill Mr. Hunter clearly has, giving us heroism without perfection, mythos without boredom, and fantastical narrative without fluff and nonsense. This is a superb work of fantasy in the modern environment, and I highly recommend it to fans of fantasy, adventure, and the slightly macabre. Bravo, Mr. Hunter. I look forward to more from Hal Cedric and his friends. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for me for now. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves and obviously keep reading.